Pancake everyone! In today's video we have everything you need for an exciting movie. Danger, a mysterious murder, and a story about a doctor who had to perform his own appendectomy. But here is the catch. These stories happened in reality. And it all happened for one reason. All these people chose to work in extreme cold. For example, there are people who barehandedly extract massive ships from the ice. And this is not our imagination. We'll tell you more about it later. Still complaining about your job? Then we're coming to you. Antarctic bases often need workers, and it's not necessarily about being a geodesist or something like that. They often call for electricians, laborers, even lawyers. In the winter months, which for the entire southern hemisphere are June, July and August, the air temperature here can reach -75 degrees Celsius. Sometimes it's so cold outside that a person simply cannot go out if they want to keep all their body parts intact. The lowest temperatures on the planet have been reached here. On August 3, 2004, a temperature of -91.2 degrees Celsius was recorded in Antarctica. And that can only mean one thing: you'll have to stay indoors, which often leads to increased tension in the team and conflicts. Therefore, candidates must be psychologically resilient and able to negotiate even with the most uncompromising arguers. So what will you be doing in Antarctica? Some fascinating research? But wait, we've already established that you're not a scientist. Perhaps you'll be a laborer, an electrician or a driver. Most likely due to the bad weather you'll be doing nothing, especially if your work involves outdoor tasks. And that's where it can be dangerous. This is not just a warning. People literally went insane at the stations. Locked up without the ability to go outside, they tried to kill their colleagues. As a result, they spent the entire winter locked in storage rooms, threw axes at each other over a chess game, and the number of drunken brawls is incalculable. The monotonous diet, isolation from loved ones, and sheer boredom also affect well-being. And there is no way to go for a walk or anywhere until the shift is over. There is a gym on the base, but it was primarily built for work purposes, so it's not exactly equipped with a variety of equipment. That's probably why they ask for a mental health certificate and proof of absence of dependencies before sending anyone to Antarctica. But if they ask everyone for a certificate, you might think we're safe. Well, think again. Just imagine, you're sitting at the base for 3 months during winter, and suddenly, without any health complaints or other indications, someone mysteriously dies. Not because of a stabbing or falling off a cliff, not because they were crushed by ice or got lost. They just walked and died. Of course, the resident doctor will examine the body, but blood tests cannot be done because the outdated equipment stops working when you need it the most. The weather is terrible and the body cannot be sent home for investigation or burial, so you and the team decide to leave it in the ice. Well, to prevent it from decomposing. It's not until 6 months later, when everything starts working properly again and there is an opportunity to send the body back home. There he is examined, and it turns out that the poor guy was murdered. The investigation reached a dead end. 6 months have passed. The deceased's belongings were given to his family, another person is already living in his room, and it's difficult to interrogate the colleagues because they are citizens of different countries. The death of Rodney Marks, an Australian astrophysicist, is still unresolved. So if you go to work in Antarctica, be on your guard. And try not to sustain any serious injuries, not to wander far from the base, as there is a great risk of getting lost and freezing to death. You've probably heard about Australia being a continent that wants to kill you. But Rodney Marks lived in Australia for 30 years without a scratch, and as soon as he came to Antarctica, he disappeared. The working conditions are not easy, but the salaries are high. So what if they push the limits of human endurance and often involve the risk of death? What? You're already waiting for the next vacancy? But your work here will be very important for humanity. Wait, where are you going? Okay, maybe the Arctic will be easier. It's only -50 degrees Celsius in winter, with polar nights lasting for 3 months, often accompanied by winds of 40 meters per second. In such a blizzard, polar researchers try not to go outside. They sit in a room that is swaying from strong gusts of air and think, what can we do? In the summer, it reaches 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, and there is the polar day. The sun reflecting off the snow can blind you, so polar researchers try not to go outside the base without sunglasses. In general, the minimum survival kit in the Arctic looks like this: a winter, transitional and fleece clothing set, felt boots plus summer boots, woolen and thermal socks, a hat and scarf, gloves for working in the cold, and leather mittens with fur. And since it's inconvenient to ride a snowmobile with sunglasses that keep falling off, it's better to bring ski goggles. Before arriving at the workplace, candidates should obtain a certificate of full medical examination, documentation of vaccinations against diphtheria and yellow fever, and of course a psychological test and certificates of tuberculosis, mental disorders, and drug addiction absence. It's also necessary to come up with a hobby to pass the long winter evenings without boredom. A guitar, books, board games, a football or a badminton set, anything will do. The employer provides a diverse diet as much as possible: porridge, canned food, and semi-prepared meals. Meat and fish are mandatory. Vegetarians need not apply. In the Arctic, just like in Antarctica, it is very dangerous to be outside the base during a blizzard. A snowmobile can break down, and if passing polar researchers don't rescue, then consider yourself lost. You'll turn into either a snowdrift or an icicle. Why either? Most likely both. In general, as seasoned individuals say, in the Arctic it's better not to wander more than 20 meters away from the team, or you may get lost. In addition to the obvious challenges of isolation, harsh climate, the nature that occasionally tries to kill candidates, polar researchers don't have days off. Every day they need to take readings and record them in reports, otherwise the research will be incomplete. But the places are beautiful. You can engage in photography and win a competition or become a blogger without interrupting your work. However, there's a problem with the internet. Its usage is limited to research needs, primarily for work, so no YouTube during working hours. They say that after 6 p.m., when free time begins, you can spend a little time online. And what about medical care, you ask? Well, it's in order. Usually there is a medic on the base who can calmly perform dressings or minor surgeries. Yes, right there on the base. But what if nothing can reach or travel to the mainland? Then you have to find a way to manage on your own. And what if the medic himself needs an operation in this situation? The only one for tens or even hundreds of kilometers around. Just imagine, you're on the base surrounded by nothing but snow, ice, and other bases like yours. Suddenly, your doctor starts experiencing symptoms of appendicitis. At first, he tries to be brave because there is no help to expect. There are no planes, and there is even a snowstorm. So he initially hopes for antibiotics and bed rest, but they don't help. And after a couple of days of suffering, the young surgeon finally decides to do the unthinkable – operate on himself. Of course, his comrades helped him. None of them were doctors, though. Therefore, the surgeon left clear instructions and began the operation. As time showed, it was done just in time before the appendix ruptured. The operation was successful. The surgeon survived. His actions were recognized as an act of heroism, and afterward, he continued his studies and even defended his thesis. This story happened in May 1961. The doctor's name was Leonid Rogozov. By the way, speaking of that, do you still have your wisdom teeth or appendix? Then I'm sorry, this job is not for you. It seems that the rules changed after that story with the doctor, but at least in the Arctic and Antarctica, there are bases, walls, roofs, internet, albeit not constant. You can warm up and have no problem cooking hot meals. But our next vacancy can't boast the same. Well, perhaps we exaggerated a bit with the food, but mountaineers do face difficulties. Indeed, mountaineers find themselves in terrifying situations, especially in summer. For example, someone might fall, the equipment won't hold, but in winter, all the risks are intensified. Unlike the warm season, here you have to climb on ice, when a strong wind tries to knock you down and an avalanche buries as many people as possible. And let's not forget that all this happens in significant frost. Of course, mountaineers prepare for winter climbs, special equipment, warmer clothing, tents and stoves. But if everything in life went according to plan, what kind of life would it be? Boring, optimists would say. Safe, pessimists would say. The level of discomfort can be understood from some instructions on sleeping without a stove at -30 degrees left by experienced mountaineers for their colleagues. It's something a person who's used to sleeping in a warm bed wouldn't understand. The recommendations are quite serious. If you have an empty backpack, hide your feet in it to protect them from the cold. Never try to suppress shivering. If the cold is very severe, sit instead of lying down. And if the shelter is not trustworthy or drafty, it's better not to sleep. Quite radical, isn't it? One thing they definitely don't recommend is drinking alcohol. It doesn't warm you up. Instead, it helps the body lose heat. But that's all about emergency situations. In most cases, people simply sleep in tents, sleeping bags, and observe minimal frostbite prevention techniques. Now, you might have heard a little about the next job. Being a reindeer herder is tough and honorable. It's like being a businessman. You eat reindeer meat, live under a roof made of reindeer skins, and often lie on them as well. You even make clothes and shoes out of them. It's almost self-sufficiency, and don't forget about selling, of course. However, you have to live in a chum, a tent that you assemble and disassemble, because you can't stay in one place. You need to move in search of new pastures for the reindeer, and forget about hobbies. By the time you've built your home, provided food for yourself and your family, checked the reindeer, driven them and taken them for a walk, the day is already over. It's all advantages. Due to the inaccessibility of the territory, reindeer herders rarely have vegetables or fruits in their diet. They mostly rely on protein, fish and reindeer meat. This is what unites reindeer herders and polar explorers. What else unites them? For example, home medical assistance. Often even during childbirth, the whole family has to manage. Someone fetches water and heats it, someone comforts the mother. Interesting fact, but let's start from the beginning. A reindeer herder is a full-fledged profession, useful and specific. And what about the wives of reindeer herders? They set up the chum, cook food on a single stove, arrange everything so that no one freezes, they sew clothes and even decorate them to stand out. They do so much, and reindeer herders wouldn't be able to manage without them. They wouldn't have time to take care of their reindeer. It was decided that this was not right, and so the wife of a reindeer herder acquired her own profession, a chum worker. The salary is certainly small, but as they say, it's the little things that matter. But now it's time for the most dangerous and difficult job in the far north. Icebreakers are definitely encountered less frequently than miners, although their work is somewhat similar. But why is this job so rare and dangerous? It can't be understood without some background. As we mentioned in our video about Yakutia, which you can find on our channel, the difficulty of life in the cold pole is not only due to the cold itself. Permafrost and 8 months winter make these lands inaccessible for delivering food and various goods. That's why people usually try to stock up for the remaining 4 months of the year, and the Lena River helps with that. Ships constantly navigate along it without respite or rest. There is no time even for repairs or inspections, and there are so many of these ships that when winter comes, there isn't enough space for all of them in the docks. That's why entire clusters of ships become frozen in the ice. And here come the icebreakers. Fearless and unyielding individuals armed with chainsaws, shovels, and sometimes fans. The task of the icebreakers is to cut a corridor in the river ice beneath the ship, remove the ice from the corridor, reach the propellers, detach them, and transport them to the docks, where specialists will inspect and repair them. Sometimes these corridors are also used to assess damage and repair the hull. The main working time for icebreakers is when it's cold. It's preferable for it to be around -50 degrees Celsius. Working in such conditions is safer and easier to the extent possible in such extreme cold. They saw the ice in layers, cut a layer and leave it for a couple of days for the homemade corridor floor to freeze. Until this icy floor reaches a thickness of at least 15 centimeters, no one should step on it. Otherwise, there is a risk of it cracking. But sometimes in February-March it warms up to -30 degrees Celsius. While ordinary city dwellers breathe a sign of relief, icebreakers face difficulties. You see, at -30 degrees, the ice freezes slower, increasing the risk of the corridor walls cracking and flooding it along with the people inside. That's why icebreakers bring fans with them and blow cold air into the unfinished corridors to expedite the process. An icebreaker can remove a layer of ice that is too thick, leading to flooding, or they can encounter an air bubble, which automatically causes flooding. Moreover, specialists descend into these corridors to repair the hull, and they do so closer to spring, when the ice is no longer stable and can give way at any moment. Once again, the corridor can be filled with icy water, making escape impossible. And if that specialist happens to be a welder with a high-voltage welding machine, there is no point even trying to save them. Well, what do you think? Have you found a job opportunity that interests you? Even if you haven't, we hope we managed to surprise you. See you in our upcoming videos.